Long before prisons or jails were established, there existed other ways to punish criminals. For this purpose, dreadful torture devices were created, causing pain, suffering, and even death. Today, we'll explore the worst punishments in human history. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and as always, give us a thumbs up. And now, let's get into the video. 1. Known as the Judas cradle or Judas chair, this cruel torture technique is considered a distant cousin of impalement. Impalement, for those who don't know, was a method used by Vlad the Impaler, the Prince of Wallachia, who ruled the region during the 15th century. A sharp spear was driven into the ground, and the victim was placed on top of it until they became a human skewer. It started from below, piercing through all the organs until it reached the chest, done slowly and painfully. That's impalement. Now, let's talk about the Judas cradle, which is like an evolution of this method. In the Judas cradle, victims were forced to sit on top of pointed wooden pyramids, and to intensify the suffering, weights were placed on their legs, splitting them in half. With this, the person, the criminal, or the unfortunate soul, would slowly open from bottom to top. Not to mention the infections and diseases that were present on the Judas cradle, as it was never cleaned in any way. But what does that matter when you're being split in half, right? 2. The torture rack was essentially a wooden table with ropes that secured the victim's hands and feet at the ends. Through a mechanism with a wheel and handle, the person was stretched until they couldn't bear it anymore. Furthermore, during the late Middle Ages, the rack sort of got a 2.0 version with iron spikes that penetrated the victim's back. So, as if ripping off their hands and legs weren't enough, they also added spikes. This torture method was considered one of the most painful in medieval culture and was often used to force criminals to confess their crimes. 3. In the TV series Vikings, in the 4th season, there is an instrument of torture called the blood eagle. This ritual was so bloody that even today, many historians debate whether it actually existed or if it was just stories invented over the years. According to the stories, it was Nordic warriors who used this method. First, the victim's back was cut to expose the spine. That alone is torture in itself, like something out of Mortal Kombat. Then, they would take the ribs and turn them outward, making them look like wings. Outside the body, like that. And to finish, the lungs were removed. All of this while the person was still alive, until they couldn't bear it anymore. And according to tradition, while all this was happening, the victim couldn't scream at all. Because, according to beliefs, if they screamed, if they showed weakness, they couldn't enter Valhalla. But, since this practice was so heavy, it's not certain if they actually did it. It's possible that 2 or 3 people did, but doing this to everyone would be too much. According to many historians, this practice did happen and became known as the blood eagle. 4. Keel hauling is a punishment mainly used by Dutch and French sailors in the 1500s. The torture was so brutal that often the victim wouldn't survive. In this torture, the victim was hung outside the ship with a rope and quickly pulled down, causing their body to scrape against the hull. Besides the ship being giant and underwater, the hull was usually covered in barnacles and crustacean shells, which are as hard as stone. So, in this torture, while the victim was drowning, they would also end up with their body torn apart and soaked in salt water, becoming a human scrubber. 5. The head crusher or skull breaker was a terrible torture method used during the Spanish Inquisition. The instrument was quite simple but very cruel. Because, as the name suggests, a person would place their head in it, and someone would then turn it to crush the head. The torturer only needed to tighten the screw to compress the victim's head, which was enough to break their teeth, jaw, and even make their eyes pop out. 6. This other method also appeared in a series, this time in Game of Thrones, in the 9th episode of the 6th season. In fact, this method has also appeared in several movies, such as Too Fast, Too Furious. The person grabs the rat, puts it under a bucket, and starts heating the bucket. Then, the rat gets desperate and bites the guy's belly. And that's basically what was done. Several rats were placed on the person's belly, and a bucket was placed on top. The bucket was heated, and the rats became desperate. Sometimes, they would bite the bucket, and other times, they would bite the victim's belly. And depending on how long the rat stayed there, it could even create a path through their body to escape. So, what do you think of these tortures? Leave your comments. We know that there are many other tortures that didn't appear in this video. In fact, there's one known as the Brazen Bull, which we'll release a video specifically about soon. There's also the Iron Maiden. If you have any other torture methods you want to hear about in a part 2, comment below. Thank you for watching, bye.